Z clauses. Z clauses, we all know what they are. They can be additional clauses or amendments to existing contract clauses. We do need Z clauses to make bespoke to different sectors of the industry. We just don't need as many as often get written. So in terms of clients, so clients have got a responsibility, think about and challenge if a Z clause really is necessary. Do you actually really need it? If a Z clause is to alter the risk profile, at what cost could that be? Contractors aren't idiots. If you're putting risk onto them, then they're going to be pricing that risk and adding it to the tender price. Clients follow the principles of the contract in terms of clarity, workout and contractual language. How often have we seen Z clauses where they start to introduce subjective words or increase the word count? One of the previous Z Clause of the Year award winners, I think it was 2016, was 183 words long. So think about what you're doing in that regard. Another little one I've looked on my slides here is, could you now remember NEC4 is gender neutral? I've been at a project fairly recently where the Z clause is adding in he and his to the contract. They actually amended the contract without deliberately, but understand the NEC rules. It's 21st century now, the contract is gender neutral. Flowchart, any proposed amendments to ensure they work and do not create ambiguity. So if you're adding something in, flowchart it, like the NEC did with theirs. Theirs are tried and tested. So make sure you're trying and testing your own clauses if you're adding them in. Contractors, read them. Let's just leave it there. So read the Z clauses and any amended contracts. Don't forget, sometimes Z clauses are incorporated in. Oh no, there's no Z clauses. We just got a massively amended contract. So whatever the changes are, you need to understand them. Preferably at tender stage, because obviously it's too late after that. So look at what's changed and get help where necessary. If you need help in understanding, deciphering, there's a whole array of consultants, some of which you've already heard from today. Some of it they do for free by the LinkedIn group if you've got the odd question. If you've got a lot more, they might talk about a little bit of consultancy rates with you, but that will then retain you and your business if you're understanding what it is. Challenge any clauses you would not be wanting to have to price. And again, before you sign. And contractors, please don't have a set of generic Z clauses you always pass down to subcontractors, other ones that are absolutely necessary for internal governance. That theme might feature in this segment today. So since the last conference, regular frustrating amendments, I generally still keep seeing amendments to clause 17.1, 63.10. And the gist of that is ambiguity in the scope. It goes against the party who creates the ambiguity. That sounds fair, right? So whoever creates that mess, it goes against that party, but we see clients amending it. We know it's mess, so we're going to put that risk onto you as the contractor. Again, at what cost, at what price? Maybe put more effort into making sure your scope is thorough and not having ambiguities within it. Deletions of compensation events in particular, number 12 and number 13. So ground conditions, physical conditions, and worse than 1 in 10 year weather event, making those contractors risk because they've been deleted. Good industry practice, capitalised, so therefore it's introduced as a defined term, and then it's a 67-word sentence that could mean absolutely anything, and yet someone's added it in and it's meant to be, yeah, we're going to apply to that. Additional disallowed costs, so sometimes we see extra disallowed costs being added in to the cost reimbursable, option C onwards. 61.3, making all compensation events time barred, not just the ones the contractor is obliged to notify. So that's a subtle one. The time bar we talked about earlier is only on the ones the contractor is obliged to notify. Any of the project manager is obliged to notify, they're not time, contractors not time barred. But delete that, and then it means all compensation events are time barred, even the ones that the project manager should be actually notifying themselves. Deletion of the deemed acceptance leaves for compensation event quotes, leaving things open-ended. Who does that actually help? So if you cut the very remedy to actually bring the compensation event to a conclusion, who is that helping? Because the client is not tying themselves down into timescales for agreed things, and then they don't know what their liability is, they don't know their budget. That shouldn't be good for them, never mind the contractor. NEC4 Z clauses, I mentioned that uses the word he and his. So again, it's gender neutral. So follow the rules the author of the contract actually put in place in the first time. And then some deletions to elements of the schedule of cost components. Again, they're fairly tried and tested, so look out for any such deletions. They're just the regular frustrating ones. We haven't started yet, okay? Now, we're going to get into the actual ones. Oh, there's one more. Introducing concurrency as a term and a vague process. That dreaded C word. So what does that actually mean? I always make the statement in training, there's no such thing as concurrency. and there's a blog post explaining why that is the case. Best Z clause of the Year award. Like last year, there was only one nomination, so he wins. It was the only, I never say, give me the good and bad ones when I ask these nominations. There was only one nomination for a positive one. HS2 was last year's. This year's, the actual client did surprise me, I must admit. Who would have thought it? Okay, who would have thought it? Best Z clause of the Year award for Network Rail. And let's see what they wrote. So anything in red is an amendment, and I've paraphrased this. So they're requiring contractor to include additional fair payment provisions into subcontracts, including the payment timescales and the right for subcontractor to notify to the project manager of any late payments. Nice. Contractors, approval? Okay, they're not so sure. But I think that's a good clause trying to encourage the right thing. Okay, here we go. Nominations for the worst Z clauses of the year, and as ever, names have been removed to protect the guilty. And I did scale this back this year. As I was putting the presentation together, I am fearful that clients are using this as inspiration going forward. So for that reason, we've scaled it down. Okay, so we have stepped back on some of these. So yeah, let's try not to do these. So anything in white is the standard wording. Anything in red is where it's sort of been changed. So you can follow these. X18, limitations of liability. Contrary Part 1 stated X18 is included, so it's one of the secondary options. Limited liability contractors is one you're going to be looking for. We all know what it means if it's not there, unlimited liability. The Z clause said, bear in mind you've got 18.1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, I think that's it. They said delete 18.1, 2, 3 and 4. So we're adding an X18 limited liability, but then deleting the very clauses that limit the liability, and the only one they left in was number 5, which bits aren't excluded. So it's telling you the bits that aren't excluded, so why go to that trouble to do that? Before we get too much laughter, can I just point out these are real clauses? So just a reminder that this is some of the issues we're getting on projects. Now, I'm not going to read that out. I've just shown the slide because we all know program acceptance. So within 2 weeks, the project manager's got to respond. Within 2 weeks, there's then set reasons that the project manager can reject the program. And if the project manager then doesn't notify, we now know we've got the NEC4 inclusion where they could be reminded if they haven't responded, and 1 week later only, the program will be deemed accepted. So that's the good clause, that's the standard wording. And then this was an amendment to 31.3. So the red's changed, okay? In the event the program shows, and then we've got the 4 save reasons, it then says the project manager may notify the contractor that it requires the program to be amended, in which case the contractor shall comply within a reasonable period. It has nothing to do now with them having to accept it. All they're saying is, if I'm not happy with it, I want you to revise it within a reasonable timescale, but then no obligation for them to accept it. That was it. So what are they trying to achieve? Different contract, same clause. This was really weird. So 31.3, and some of you be sat in the room with this amendment, okay? Why no one challenged this at tender stage, no idea. So they amended those 4 reasons to does not allow the contractor to comply with this contract, or it materially changes timing for employer or others to provide something. So normal reason is it's not practical, or it doesn't show the information the contract requires. Apparently, that's all right, you can do that rubbish. As long as you comply with those 2, then the program's going to be accepted. It's beyond me. I don't know what logic someone wanted for that as to a program acceptance. That's why they're going to accept it. Okay, assessing compensation rates. 63.1. The prices are not changed, wherein in accordance with the price generator methodology, so that's capitalised, the total of the prices will be otherwise been increased by the lower of 0.5% of the prices, or £25,000 of the CE threshold. Once the CE threshold is exceeded, the prices shall be changed by the full amount and shall not be limited to the amount in excess of the CE threshold. Okay, what they're trying to say is, well, up to 25 grand, it's only a little bit, so it's either 25 grand or 0.5% of the prices, whichever is the lower. So, okay, we're going to add 25 grand to our tender price then. And anyway, you've still got to manage the CE process of quotes to work out when you've reached 25 grand. So it changes nothing. So other than the client's now got budget 25 grand in their tender, that's the only benefit. So a very strange amendment. Now, I did say I scaled it back. I could have gone on. Now, this was the winner until the winner came in, and then this was demoted to runner-up. Okay, so the runner-up is this one. Rely upon information. Capitalised R, capitalised U, capitalised I. So, rely upon information means the information and data, but not any opinions or interpretation of such information and data, identified as being rely upon information in contracted part 1. It goes on. The contractor warrants that it is reviewed and scrutinised, save for any rely upon information, the scope and the site information prior to the contract date, exercising best practice with a view to identify any mistake, ambiguity, inconsistency, inaccuracy, discrepancy or omission that is contained in the scope or the site information. I love it. We've got a categorisation now of scope. This bit of it is rely upon information, the rest of it is, I nearly used Richard's word, rubbish. So you can only rely on reliable information. The other scope is unreliable information. Isn't that interesting? To correct, that's not the right word, a different category of scope. So only the rely upon information is what you can rely upon within the scope. Everything else is unreliable. Interesting. I'd say the winner. The winner. Unfortunately, the drum roll was on the runner-up. You get a winner as well. Right, we've already looked at the resolving ambiguity, 17.1, 63.10, so an ambiguity is assessed in favour of the one who did not create the ambiguity. So if the discrepancy is in the client scope, then the contractors deem to allow the one more favourable for themselves. If the contractor creates it by issuing a design for acceptance that doesn't apply to the scope, then they create the ambiguity, that goes against the contractor in favour of the client. Fine, that's fair, okay? Now, this is in the subcontract, and I'm not sure if this was in the client version or not, and I've kept the clause that I saw in the subcontract, and they said this. The subcontractor makes a proposal to the contractor as how to resolve, and the contractor gives an instruction resolving any ambiguity or inconsistency referred to in clause 17.1 unless it's resolved by operation of clause 17.2. So far, not too bad. Apart from, I'm not sure a subcontractor will always know what the proposal is because it might be something that they're not in control of coming up with a solution. But here's the amendment that wins this year's Z Clause of the Year award. Where the contractor instructs the subcontractor to resolve the ambiguity or inconsistency by not implementing the most onerous possible outcome, then a compensation arises, and for the avoidance of doubt, look out for that. In every Z Clause you see for the avoidance of doubt, what is saying next is absolute garbage, okay, in my experience. And it says the prices are reduced accordingly, otherwise the instruction does not give rise to a compensation. So, what that means is, can subcontractors, in any situation where there's ambiguities in the contractor's scope, it's bad enough to say you should allow for the worst case scenario, where they instruct you to do the lower scenario, so the cheaper one, they actually want the price difference in that saving as well. Isn't that incredible? So it's one thing to say that, yeah, any ambiguities is your risk, but to actually say where we create an ambiguity and we deem that you want the lower grade, you should allow for the higher grade, we want the price difference between the two. So, thank you. No round of applause, and that definitely doesn't warrant it because that, I could have had others, but that was the worst one I think I saw. We've got a responsibility as a group, as an industry, to avoid some of this. We do a lot of good stuff in the group. I think we are making a change. I know for a fact that 2 of the previous 4 winners of our Z Clause of the Year award have gone on to change their clause. So let's see if these guys can. Don't know if you remember last year's winner, got to repeat it again. So the notification of the compensation thing, you're time barred. If you don't notify within 8 weeks, if you remember, they reduced it down to 24 hours. Okay. So we are hoping for less nominations next year. So on to a much more positive note and on to NEC5. And what do we, as NEC People, our LinkedIn group, what do we want to see in the next generation of NEC contracts? Within this group, most representatives from today, most of the recognised NEC experts in the country are either managers or members of this NEC People group. We have numerous suggestions from this group, from discussions, previous breakout groups. Only last year we had a breakout group. What do you want to see in the contract? We've taken and absorbed those elements and we've discussed them and to see, okay, what can we do different going forward? So last year's breakout group and a review from our NEC panel members have come up with a list of what we strongly encourage should be in NEC5 whenever that is issued. So we don't know this is coming. Before Ian Heath is panicking, hang on, do you know something I don't? We don't. It's a bit like the iPhone 15 will be coming out, what we think it will. Probably that's even a stronger chance that will be coming out, but it will naturally evolve. And we've already had 4 revisions of the NEC4 contract, but minor amendments. So it's not changed every time, but there will be a point at some point in the future we will be having NEC5. So these are your ideas, okay? Your ideas you've come up with, and as a panel we've looked at them. And in the meantime, later this year, the plan is we're going to finish off top and tailing these suggestions. We're going to look to produce a set of Z clauses where we're going to try and get clients buy-in to actually adopt some of these Z clauses into their contracts. So we're looking for some early adopters. The Environment Agency, obviously, there's the first ones, but there's others represented today that you can actually put Z clauses. I said to good use for a change, maybe that's harsh, but actually I'll probably stand by it. So we can actually incorporate some of these things now before NEC, hopefully in the future, incorporate them into NEC5. And remember, you were part of it. If you see these changes in the future, have a bit of pride that you as a group member helped some of these changes for the future. Stand up, my learning panel members. We sit everyone apart from Rob Horn, I think, but just stand up, just so everyone, our panel members. Rob's, in fact, Rob's out on a call somewhere. So we've had informal discussions on some of the suggestions that we've had within the group, and we reviewed them all together. And these are the ones that I put mostly agree on. Okay, but generally there was a consensus that we all agreed that yes, these were good ideas. Now, this is where I want you to have opened up your QR code. So in the presenter's QR code on your phone, we want to check in with you and see what you think. Now, all of these ones, as experts, alleged experts, as we call ourselves, but very experienced practitioners, we think these are good, but we want your advice or feedback as to whether or not you think and agree with these well. And maybe Nathan, you could just let me in on the results. I can't see the screen, so maybe if everyone disagrees, just tell me they agree, just to make me feel better. But honest answers. And there is an option for on the fence, genuinely, because look, in the very short time you've got here, you're only going to have 20 seconds to think about it. I'll try and explain why we need the issue. You might be on the fence in that time, but then on reflection, you might come back and think, actually, no, that is a good idea. So don't feel bad about putting on the fence in this scenario. We don't want you to say yes or no if actually, I need to think about that one more. That is a valid answer in today's presentation. So the 3 choices for each proposal is yes, a good idea, no, a bad idea or not necessary, or yeah, I'm on the fence. Early warning, you might get splinters if you sit on the fence. Proposal 1. So I'm going to talk through each of these and then I just want you to vote whether you think yes, no, or on the fence. So proposal number 1. Not being able to instruct an earlier key date without acceleration. So completion date, the sexual completion dates cannot be brought forward without agreement, and the project manager cannot make their own assessment of the quote. Why can the project manager therefore instruct an earlier key date and then make their own assessment of the resultant cost, basically imposing acceleration on the contractor? I've always really struggled with this one. So the suggestion from our learned panel is amend section 36 to include key dates as well as completion dates and sexual completion dates, so they cannot be brought forward without agreement. So, what do you reckon? Yes, no, or on the fence? We'll only have 10 seconds or so for each of these, so we don't want to sort of track them out. And maybe Nathan, you could just give me the edited highlights. Proposal 2. Contractor proposed assumptions for compensation and quotations. Clients, project managers, reluctant to give contractor assumptions and no recognition of contractor assumptions within quotes. Raise your hand if you find that. Are project managers willing to give you project managers' assumptions? Raise your hand if that's a problem, where they don't seem to be very forthcoming. Okay. We should formalise the option for the contractor to suggest an assumption and for the project manager to accept or not the assumption. And the way we could do that is an additional clause in 62, whereby the contractor, bearing in mind you've got 3 weeks to do a quote, within 1 week the contractor can propose assumptions on which to base the quotation, and within a further week the project manager responds with their acceptance or otherwise of the assumption, and then there's a further week to top and tail the quote. So let us know. I won't keep asking for the results. You can see them out of interest, what you think as group members. I'll keep going with them. And if no response, the contractor will simply price the risk rather than assume the assumptions are agreed. So we're not doing anything contractually incorrect there. We're trying to encourage an assumption, and if the assumption isn't agreed, well then they price the risk anyway. So you're not saying, if you don't respond within a week, then we'll assume they're accepted, because you can't. That's not what the contract says. So there's our loop. I try not to be biased, but this one really annoys me. Reducing engineering as such as subcontract program acceptance back to 2 weeks. I don't know whose idea it was to extend in NEC4 that it was always 2 weeks to accept a subcontract program, and yet in NEC4 it now says 3 weeks. It's crazy and unnecessary to have extended the period. It's now 1 week before the next program is due, increasing the chance there'll be no time to revise it and get it accepted within that period. Whether the contractors have their program accepted should have no bearing on acceptance or not of a subcontractor program. They're independent of each other. So my suggestion, our suggestion, is, and obviously I might suggest a few of these, but then if not all my experts agreed with me, then it didn't make the list. But we generally agreed, yeah, this makes sense. Do you agree then? So proposal 3, subcontracts, the 2 week period should stand for subcontractor acceptance. So that's the proposal. So passes for proposal number 3. Proposal 4, access compensation for access after the first access is achieved. Maybe not a major one, this one, but does the contract make it clear that at any point access is not given, that it's recoverable as a compensation event, rather than just the initial access? What if access given by the access date and then withdrawn 2 days later? Is it covered? I think it is, but why not just have that clarity? So bring the clarity to 60.12 that, not just the initial access, but any access would fit as a compensation event. So it seems to make sense to us that we just clarified that. Don't know if anyone's experienced that as a loop, but so proposal 4, interested in your answers on that one. Proposal 5. This one's been batted around quite a lot, so let's see if we think it's a good idea, and then it's a case of, well, okay, what are we going to do with this one? So that one's a bit trickier. Early warnings obviously focus on things that could be an issue, but what about opportunities, as well as having an equivalent opportunities register, as well as the early warning registers, which are more about things that are going to be an issue. So does NEC really encourage the discussions of opportunities as well as potential risks? Sure, we've got like value engineering now, whole life cost savings into NEC4, but we could have contractors' proposals and the whole life costs. So could this be adopted like that for early warnings? So a possible solution is amend section 15, or maybe set up a new section to include discussion of opportunities, or is the missing an opportunity a risk that should already be covered? So, interested on your thoughts on that one. So answers please for proposal number 5. Proposal 6, option to cap delay damages. So the contract data simply states the amount per day. Should there be a line to have damages capped at a percentage of the prices, this would encourage clients to consider capping a contract's liability and getting a more reasonable tender price. So the simpler remedy will be an amendment in contract data to allow this as an option. And I've said this quite a few times actually, where clients have done that. They've amended contract data to say, yeah, your damages are limited to an amount, or 10% of contract sum, 100% of contract sum, whatever. So, over to you. So, these are suggestions. So, what do you reckon? That is one I've seen numerous times now, so maybe that is, but we'll see what you think. That's proposal number 6. Seven, 13.7 to include instruction as well as notification. This seems really subtle. Actually, I think quite important. 13.7 goes to the trouble of making it clear notification should be notified separately. And this, for me, should absolutely be the case for instructions as well, so they cannot be buried in minutes of meetings or anywhere else. So the remedy, amend 13.7 to include instructions as well as notifications. So we've had a bit of a rant, myself and Richard in LinkedIn, about the use of GCs. Now, sorry, Think Project, CMAR, you're in the room. You've got a great system. Why do you have a general communication form where most of it is issued for acceptance? So the trouble is, because that GC form exists, people use it, we call it the general cop-out form. That's what it stands for. So That is an issue that could be resolved. All the cloud-based systems should really sort of look at that and see if they can provide a better solution to that. So the proposal, number 7, is to make it clear in 13.7 that not only notifications have to be separate from other forms of communication, but instructions do as well. Now, if you do that, you could argue, well, is there anything else that should be?
I was going to say communication.
Yeah. So, but then communications could be too far-reaching. So, what do you think? So, proposal 7 is at least now to pick up instructions should be separately from other forms of communication. Number 8, the COVID clause. Obviously, very specific risks now, but I don't think it's going to fit number 19 anymore. 3.5 years ago, we didn't know a shutdown of the country was possible for, obviously something like a global pandemic. But the trouble is now, you do know that it's possible we could be locked down later this year. I think it's highly unlikely, but it's not impossible that we could be locked down later this year. So where does it fit at the moment? Where does it fit that it is a compensation event? Because I don't think it fits a 19 anymore, which is like a force majeure type event, because it could happen. All right, hopefully not, but it could. So, make an additional reason in 60.1 with any sanctions introduced that were not there, a contract award would be a compensation event. A bit like changes in law ethos. So we all sign up to current lockdown rules, which are basically none. And then if there are lockdown rules, well, that will instigate a very specific compensation. There's the suggestion. What do you reckon? Audience, vote on proposal number 8. As I say, we will collate your answers and look at it. You can see live if you're agreeing with each other or not, but I'll have that fun. I was going to say later on tonight, maybe tomorrow. Proposal 9, a fair payment clause to subcontractors. Maybe take your leaf out of network rails. That's not a sentence I say very often. Description, additional words making it clear the contractor cannot introduce terms more onerous than the subcontractor they signed up to in their ECC contract, and the payments must be made within a period no more than 7 days longer the contractor will be paid under the ECC contract. Some of you sat in this room, do you remember the days of 64-day payment terms for subcontractors? Who went more than 100-day payment terms for subcontractors? Anyone raise your hand? Okay, you always did that with pride. That was, those were the bad days. So, just a very simple additional clause to 3.6. What do you reckon? This is your choice, your vote. So yes, no, maybe not. Vote on proposal number 9. Proposal 10, 31.2, to make reference to time risk allowances, TRA, being against individual activities or small groups of activities. Because the guidance notes say it, but we always have, all our trainers in this room, we always have the discussion about what TRA is and how you could show it in the different ways or whatever, because the contract's not specific. The guidance note says it should be against individual activities or small groups of activities. So if we put that in the contract, then at least it would stop some of you contractors out there, I coined a phrase, putting a blob at the end. And there you go, time risk allowance. That's not time risk allowance. That's probably turbo flow, but that's another story. So, what do you reckon? Proposal 10, necessary? Probably not, but it wouldn't do any harm. So, you can vote on proposal 10. Number 11. Remove options A to F as a book and only have digitally. The black book only in paper. Not many people use the specific option A or the option C or the option F contracts anymore. And anyway, there's so many Z clauses that actually are probably integrated in, so you can't use the book anyway because they're all embedded in. The box set should no longer print separate books for the ECC options A through to F like it does in professional services or term service, so why do it? So we could save at least half the rainforest, I reckon, by doing that. So what do you reckon? Only print the ECC black book for all options and don't have the option A book, the option C book. Certainly, maybe digitally, no problem there, but as a book, has anyone felt the weight of an NEC4 box set? Well, there's 6 books we could lose overnight and save a few trees along the way. Proposal 11. To me, that's a no-brainer, but I don't want to sway you. Proposal 12. Okay, I added this one in. Sir, Mr. Earnshaw provoked me to think, actually, that's interesting. So I want you to vote on Neil's suggestion, which actually I thought was really interesting from his presentation only this morning. So clause 10, obligations of the project manager to act impartially, consider all circumstances. It seems project managers are the cause of any disputes as they don't understand their duty as independent certifier in respect of addressing payments and compensations. The engineer in the old IC 7th edition was subject to this duty, clause
2.7, and the adjudicator is subject to this in NEC4 clauses W1 and W2. So the simple remedy is basically what Neil put on the screen earlier. 10.3, the project manager considers all the circumstances and acts impartially in making assessments. What do you reckon? Audience votes.
Yes, no, or on the fence on that one. And the last one, proposal 13, even as experts, we don't agree. So we are going to need your help on some of these as to, okay, what do you think? Group, do you agree? Some of us think yes, some of us think no. What do you think as the industry? Is it something we don't need to campaign for, or is it something we want to campaign for? Proposal 13 was one that my fellow learned, experienced consultants that I consulted here, none of them agreed on this one. It's like, okay, so I was going to drop it, but then when I put it in the LinkedIn group, this is the need for having sectional defect days for a sectional completion. So in training, this comes up often, that there's no sectional defect dates for a sectional completion, and that means there's no risk of retention, and the defect date isn't triggered. Without points of discussions about, well, they're liable for defects anyway for 6 years, 12 years, or whatever. But when I put this in group, the result was 79% people said yes, 15% said no, and 7 were on the fence on that one. So it'll be interesting to see in the room today as to whether you think there is a need for that or not. So that's another one we will take a look at. So if we had any more time, we could discuss any others, but that's sort of food for thought as to where we're heading as a group. This is what we're doing for the industry. We already had some influence into NEC4, so a lot of the suggestions that came from this group have ended up in NEC4, so we could do the same thing for NEC5. Reka and the team at NEC, they listen, and they take our contributions, and then obviously they can decide on which ones they do want to take forward. So hopefully food for thought. So Z clauses, let's make sure we have good ones there, and going forward, some of those, maybe as clients, we can introduce as positive Z clauses going forward.